Princess Charlotte seemed a bit uncertain on her first day, doing her best to hide behind Kate's skirt.
At its heart, Christmas speaks of love taking form in the simplest, most human way.
The palace is in absolute panic. Prince Louis just did the unthinkable and exposed a royal secret so shocking it's sending shockwaves around the entire world. What he revealed about Princess Charlotte has left everyone speechless. The monarchy tried everything to keep this hidden, but one innocent question changed everything. In just 5 devastating words, Louis confirmed the truth nobody wanted to hear. Charlotte's real condition is finally out, and it's far more serious than you could ever imagine. What comes next will leave you stunned.
The Prince and Princess of Wales have rolled up their sleeves to give back to UK communities following King Charles's coronation. Joined by their children, it marked an important milestone for Prince Louis in particular.
The event itself was relatively low-key by royal standards. Prince Louis was attending a local school initiative focused on charitable giving and community engagement. Unlike the heavily orchestrated royal engagements that typically dominate headlines, this was meant to be an informal appearance. The kind where younger royals can interact with the public in a more relaxed environment. Palace aides were present, but not hovering as they might during a state function or major public appearance. The atmosphere was casual, almost ordinary, which is precisely what made what happened next so extraordinary. A journalist working for a local news outlet approached the young prince with what seemed like an innocuous question about his family. These interactions happen regularly at such events, usually resulting in polite waves, brief smiles, or carefully rehearsed responses that reveal nothing of substance. Royal children, particularly those as young as Louis, are trained from an early age to maintain a certain distance from the press, to offer pleasantries without substance. But on this particular afternoon, something shifted. Instead of deflecting or offering a standard response, Prince Louis paused, looked directly at the journalist, and spoke words that would dominate news cycles for weeks to come. According to multiple sources who were present at the event, Louis said that things were not improving, referring specifically to his sister Princess Charlotte. The exact phrasing has been reported slightly differently across various outlets, but the core message remained consistent and deeply concerning. In those few short words, the young prince confirmed what many royal watchers and insiders had been quietly speculating about for months. His sister was dealing with something serious, something ongoing, and crucially, something that was getting worse rather than better. The impact was immediate and far-reaching. Within minutes of the exchange, footage began circulating online. Social media platforms exploded with speculation, concern, and demands for clarity from Kensington Palace. What made the moment particularly striking was not just the content of what Louis said, but the manner in which he said it. Those who analysed the video noted that there was no hesitation in his voice, no playful tone that might suggest a child misunderstanding the situation. Instead, there was a weight to his words, a genuine concern that resonated with anyone who watched the clip. For months leading up to this moment, careful observers of the royal family had noticed subtle changes in Princess Charlotte's public presence. Scheduled appearances were quietly cancelled or postponed. Events that she would typically attend alongside her brothers were suddenly missing her from the official photographs. Each time, explanations were provided that seemed reasonable enough on the surface. Academic commitments were cited, as were vague references to private family matters. The palace's official line remained consistent. There was no cause for public concern, and the young princess was simply balancing her various commitments like any other child her age. But behind the carefully managed facade, a different picture was emerging. Royal correspondents with deep sources inside palace circles began hearing whispers of something more serious. Staff members bound by strict confidentiality agreements nonetheless found ways to hint at concerns. Photographs from the few public appearances Charlotte did make were scrutinized with increasing attention. Some observers noted that she appeared thinner, that her typically vibrant energy seemed diminished, that she stayed closer to her mother than usual. These observations, while not definitive on their own, began to form a pattern that was difficult to ignore. The palace's response to growing speculation had been to double down on calls for privacy. In the days immediately before Louis's revelation, trusted media outlets had reportedly been contacted by palace communications staff with requests to avoid publishing speculative pieces about Charlotte's health. The message was clear. This was a family matter, and the royal household expected the press to respect boundaries that have traditionally governed coverage of royal children. For the most part, mainstream outlets complied, though the whispers continued to grow louder in less formal channels. What made Louis's statement so devastating for the palace was the timing. Just as they believed they had successfully contained the narrative, just as the speculation seemed to be dying down, here was a member of the family itself confirming that there was indeed something to be concerned about. And it was not just any family member, it was Charlotte's own brother, a child speaking from a place of genuine worry rather than calculated public relations strategy. The phrase he used, regardless of the exact wording, trended globally within hours. Royal watchers, political commentators, and ordinary people around the world began demanding answers. What exactly was Princess Charlotte dealing with? How long has this been going on? Why had the family felt the need to keep it so tightly concealed? And perhaps most importantly, what did it say about the institution of the monarchy that even a child's health crisis had to be managed through layers of secrecy and carefully worded non-statements? The palace moved quickly to contain the damage, though many argued their response only made things worse. Within hours of the video going viral, an official statement was released. It was brief, formal, and deliberately vague. The statement emphasized the family's request for privacy and insisted that there was no need for public alarm. But it failed to address the substance of what Louis had said, and it offered no real information about Charlotte's condition or well-being. To many observers, it felt like exactly what it was, a holding pattern, a way to buy time while figuring out how to manage a situation that had spiraled beyond their control. The public reaction to the statement was swift and largely negative. People were not satisfied with platitudes about privacy when a clearly distressed child had just confirmed their worst fears. Social media became a battleground of opinions, with some defending the family's right to handle medical matters privately, while others argued that the royals exist in the public eye by choice and therefore owe a certain level of transparency to the people who support them. What made this particular crisis so challenging for the palace was that it involved children, and not just any children, but ones who have been carefully positioned as the future of the monarchy. Princess Charlotte, in particular, has been presented to the public as poised, confident, and ready for her future role. Any suggestion of vulnerability, especially related to health, threatened to undermine years of careful image management. The reality behind Princess Charlotte's carefully curated public image had been deteriorating for far longer than most people realized. While the world saw glimpses of a smiling, well-adjusted young princess at occasional public events, those with access to the inner workings of the royal household had been witnessing a very different story unfold. The first signs that something was amiss came not with a dramatic announcement or sudden hospitalization, but through a gradual series of small absences that, when viewed collectively, painted a troubling picture. It began approximately 6 months before Prince Louis's public statement. Though some sources suggest the issues may have started even earlier, Princess Charlotte was scheduled to attend a charity event that she had been looking forward to for weeks. It was the kind of engagement that young royals typically enjoy, involving children her own age and activities designed to be both meaningful and fun. Yet just days before the event, her name was quietly removed from the official attendance list. The explanation provided was vague, something about scheduling conflicts and academic priorities. At the time, few people questioned it. Royal children have busy lives, and it seemed perfectly reasonable that occasionally something would need to be given. But then it happened again. A school performance where Charlotte had been expected to participate was suddenly proceeding, without her. Family photographs that would typically include all 3 Cambridge children were released with only George and Louis present. Each incident on its own could be explained away, but together they formed a pattern that insiders found increasingly difficult to ignore. Staff members who worked closely with the family began noticing changes that went beyond mere scheduling adjustments. According to sources close to the household, Princess Charlotte's physical appearance had changed noticeably over the course of several months. She had lost weight in a way that seemed inconsistent with normal childhood development. Her energy levels, once vibrant and seemingly endless, had diminished considerably. During private family gatherings, she was observed spending more time seated, often holding her mother's hand, speaking less than usual. These observations came from extended family members and trusted staff who had known Charlotte since birth and could recognize when something was fundamentally different about her demeanor and physical presence. The change in Catherine and William was equally telling to those who knew them well. The Princess of Wales, known for her composure and grace under pressure, began displaying signs of profound stress. Royal observers noted that she frequently touched her necklace during public appearances, an unconscious gesture that body language experts identified as a self-soothing behavior associated with anxiety. Her smiles, while still present for the cameras, seemed to reach her eyes less frequently. There were moments during engagements when she appeared distracted, her attention clearly elsewhere even as she performed her official duties. Prince William's demeanour shifted in different but equally noticeable ways. Known for his generally patient approach to media interactions, he became noticeably more irritable when faced with certain questions. There were instances where he responded to journalists with an edge in his voice that was uncharacteristic of his usual professional demeanour. Palace insider Smaïd has reported that in private meetings, William had become increasingly protective of any discussion involving his children, and particularly sensitive to any suggestion that Charlotte's situation should be managed primarily as a public relations challenge rather than a family crisis. Behind closed doors, the strain on the couple was immense. They were attempting to balance their roles as senior working royals with the overwhelming reality of caring for a child with serious health concerns. Hospital visits became a regular part of their routine, though these were conducted with extraordinary discretion. Private entrances were used, appointments were scheduled at times when regular hospital traffic was minimal, and staff were bound by confidentiality agreements that went beyond the standard expectations. The couple consulted with numerous specialists, each offering possibilities but rarely definitive answers. Every week seemed to bring new uncertainties, new treatment approaches to consider, new decisions to make about their daughter's care. What made the situation particularly painful was Charlotte's own response to her condition. Despite whatever she was dealing with physically, she demonstrated a level of courage and awareness that was remarkable for someone her age. According to staff members who interacted with the family regularly, Charlotte was acutely conscious of how her illness might be perceived publicly. She reportedly asked not to be photographed if she needed to use mobility assistance. Before the few public appearances she did make, she would practice standing upright and maintaining her composure, often gripping her mother's hand tightly for support, while still managing to smile for cameras. One particularly heartbreaking detail that emerged from household sources was something Charlotte had said to her nanny during a difficult period. She had expressed the belief that if she smiled, people would not worry about her. This statement, shared quietly among staff who cared deeply for the young princess, illustrated the impossible burden she was carrying. She was not just dealing with a medical condition, she was also trying to protect those around her from worry, trying to maintain an image of strength and normalcy for the sake of others. It was a level of emotional maturity and self-sacrifice that no child should have to demonstrate. The impact on Prince Louis, though less immediately visible, was equally significant. As the youngest member of the family, Louis had always enjoyed a certain protection from the more serious aspects of royal life. He was the baby, allowed to be more carefree, less burdened by expectations. But watching his sister struggle changed something fundamental in him. Staff noticed that he became quieter, more contemplative. He asked questions about why Charlotte was not participating in activities they used to enjoy together. He wanted to know why she needed to rest so much, why she sometimes seemed sad when she thought no one was watching. There were indications that Louis had overheard conversations between his parents that were never meant for his young ears. The walls of even the grandest royal residences are not thick enough to contain every worried discussion between parents dealing with a child's serious illness. Some sources suggest that Louis had picked up on far more than his parents realized, that his understanding of the situation was more sophisticated than anyone gave him credit for. One particularly telling account claimed that Louis had told a staff member that if the adults were not going to tell people what was really happening, perhaps he should. This growing awareness in Louis created a tension within the family dynamic. William and Kate were trying to shield all their children from the full weight of public scrutiny, while simultaneously managing their own fears and responsibilities. They wanted Louis to remain innocent, to not carry the burden of his sister's situation more than necessary. Yet Louis, perceptive and deeply attached to Charlotte, was increasingly unwilling or unable to pretend that everything was fine. The palace communications team was acutely aware that the situation was becoming harder to manage. Internal discussions were held about how to handle potential questions, what to say if Charlotte's absence from events became too noticeable to ignore. there were proposals to release a carefully worded statement acknowledging some kind of health concern without providing specific details. But William and Kate resisted these approaches. They did not want their daughter reduced to a press release, did not want her medical condition to become public property, subject to speculation and commentary. They hoped that with time, Charlotte might recover sufficiently that the whole situation could remain a private family matter. What no one anticipated was that the truth would emerge, not through a carefully managed announcement or a leaked medical document, but through the spontaneous words of a young boy who could no longer bear to stay silent. Prince Louis, in his own way, had been carrying the weight of his sister's secret, watching her suffer while the adults around him managed narratives and controlled information. When the moment came at that school event, when he was away from the usual layers of palace protection, and someone simply asked him a direct question about his sister, something inside him apparently shifted. Whether it was intentional or simply the natural overflow of suppressed emotion, Louis spoke a truth that the institution had been working desperately to contain. The response from the highest levels of the royal family to Prince Louis's public statement revealed fault lines that had been developing quietly for some time. While William and Catherine retreated into their roles as protective parents, focusing entirely on their children and trying to manage the fallout in the most human way possible, other members of the royal hierarchy appeared to be operating from an entirely different playbook. The divide between those who saw this primarily as a family crisis and those who viewed it as an institutional challenge requiring strategic management became increasingly apparent in the days following Louis's revelation. King Charles and Queen Camilla's initial reaction, according to multiple palace sources, centered not on immediate concern for Charlotte's well-being, but on the potential damage to the carefully maintained image of monarchical stability. This is not to suggest they lacked family feeling, but rather that their response was filtered through decades of institutional thinking about crisis management and public perception. Within hours of the story breaking internationally, meetings were convened involving senior advisors, communication specialists, and constitutional experts. The question being asked in these gatherings was not how to best support Charlotte and her immediate family, but how to control the narrative and minimize potential long-term damage to the institution. Queen Camilla, who had spent years carefully cultivating her own public image after a controversial entry into the royal family, was reportedly particularly concerned about optics. Sources close to these discussions suggested that her first questions revolved around how the situation would be perceived by the public and media, rather than inquiries about Charlotte's medical prognosis or emotional state. This approach, while perhaps understandable from someone deeply invested in institutional preservation, struck many within the household as tone-deaf given the circumstances. The focus seemed to be on damage limitation rather than genuine family support. King Charles, for his part, approached the situation through the lens of constitutional continuity and succession planning. As someone who had waited decades to assume the throne and who had given considerable thought to the long-term future of the monarchy, he understood immediately that Charlotte's situation introduced an element of uncertainty into carefully laid plans. For years, Charlotte had been presented to the public as a future working royal, poised and prepared for the responsibilities that would eventually fall to her. The revelation of a serious health condition threatened that narrative and, by extension, raised questions about stability and capability that the institution prefers to avoid. In closed-door meetings that William was not initially included in, discussions reportedly took place about how to recalibrate public expectations regarding Charlotte's future role. Some proposals involved gradually shifting more attention and responsibility projections toward Prince George, allowing him to absorb what might have been shared duties between the siblings. Other suggestions included reducing Charlotte's public profile gradually, allowing her to fade somewhat from the spotlight without explicitly acknowledging why. These were strategic conversations about managing succession optics, treating a young girl's illness as primarily a political variable to be managed rather than a human tragedy to be addressed with compassion. When William eventually learned of these discussions, his reaction was reportedly one of fury. He had not been consulted on conversations about his own daughter's future, had not been included in meetings where her role within the family was being reassessed and recalibrated. The relationship between father and son, already complicated by differing views on how the monarchy should evolve, became significantly more strained. William saw these moves as a betrayal, an abandonment of his daughter when she most needed the institution's support. Charles, from his perspective, likely viewed his actions as protecting the broader stability of the crown, making difficult decisions that someone in his position must make. The clash represented a fundamental disagreement about whether family needs or institutional needs should take precedence in moments of crisis. Queen Camilla's role in managing the aftermath extended beyond high-level strategy discussions. She gave instructions to communications staff about how to handle future public appearances involving the Wales children. Prince Louis, in particular, became a subject of careful management. Events he had been scheduled to attend were quietly rescheduled or his participation was reduced. References to him in official communications became noticeably less frequent. When questioned about this shift, one senior aide allegedly relayed that Camilla had privately referred to Louis as a liability, a characterization that, when it leaked to staff who cared about the young prince, caused significant upset within the household. This treatment of Louis as someone to be minimized rather than supported represented a particularly cold calculation. He was, after all, a child who had spoken out of love for his sister, who had been unable to maintain a pretense that was becoming psychologically burdensome. Yet the institutional response was not to protect him or help the public understand his actions, but to reduce his visibility, to make him less central to the royal narrative going forward. It was a decision that reflected decades of palace thinking about control and image management, but it felt to many like a profound moral failure. Not everyone within the royal family accepted this approach without challenge. Princess Anne, known throughout her life for her direct manner and unwillingness to tolerate what she perceived as nonsense, became increasingly troubled by how the situation was being handled. Unlike some royals who maintained careful distance from internal conflicts, Anne decided to involve herself directly. She had always maintained a somewhat independent position within the family structure, respected for her work ethic and no-nonsense attitude, and she used that position now to push back against what she saw as a heartless institutional response to a family in crisis. Anne's intervention began quietly, with private conversations and carefully worded concerns expressed in family settings. But as it became clear that Charles and Camilla were not shifting their approach, she became more forceful. She made a point of visiting William and Catherine during their most difficult period, offering support that was notably absent from other senior royals. During this visit, she spent time with Prince Louis, and according to staff who witnessed the interaction, she knelt down to his level, placed a hand on his shoulder, and told him directly that he had been brave to stand by his sister. This simple gesture of validation, so different from the institutional response of managing him as a problem to be solved, had a profound impact on the young prince and on staff who witnessed it. Anne also reached out directly to Catherine, bypassing the usual channels of palace communication. In a phone call that Catherine later described to close friends as deeply meaningful, Anne encouraged her to trust her own instincts as a mother, rather than deferring to palace advisors whose primary concern was institutional protection. She urged Catherine to prioritize her children's well-being over royal protocol, to resist pressure to make decisions based on optics rather than genuine family needs. It was advice that carried particular weight, coming from someone who had spent her entire life within the institution and understood its mechanisms intimately. The confrontation between Anne and Charles, when it finally occurred, was reportedly intense. Anne entered a family meeting with a clear purpose: to advocate for Charlotte and to challenge the way her brother was handling the crisis. According to sources familiar with what transpired, she did not moderate her language or soften her criticism. She accused Camilla of manipulating press narratives and Charles of allowing institutional concerns to override basic human decency. The phrase that reportedly echoed through the room and subsequently leaked to staff was Anne telling Charles that Charlotte was not his pawn to be moved around a chessboard of succession planning. The meeting ended in what observers described as stunned silence. Anne had said things that needed to be said, but that few others would dare articulate to the king. She had drawn a line, making clear that she would not support an approach that treated Charlotte's illness primarily as a public relations challenge or Louis's honesty as a liability to be managed. Her stance represented a direct challenge to how the institution traditionally operates, prioritizing individual human needs over collective institutional preservation. Following this confrontation, Anne formally requested that the Palace Communications Office issue a new statement, one that acknowledged Charlotte's condition with appropriate dignity and defended Louis's courage rather than trying to minimize his role in the story. This request was denied by the communications team, operating under guidance from Charles's inner circle. The official line remained that family privacy outweighed any obligation to public transparency, that no further details would be provided regardless of public interest or demand. This refusal only strengthened Anne's resolve to continue advocating for her niece and nephew, even if it meant working against the institutional machinery she had served faithfully for decades. The palace's attempt to maintain control over the narrative began to unravel completely when the official statement was finally released. After days of mounting pressure and increasingly vocal public demands for information, Kensington Palace issued what can only be described as a masterclass in saying nothing while appearing to say something. The statement consisted of fewer than 60 words, carefully constructed to acknowledge the situation without providing any meaningful information. It thanked the public for their concern, requested privacy for the family, and assured everyone that Princess Charlotte was resting and recovering in good spirits. What it conspicuously failed to do was address any of the substantive questions that had been raised by Prince Louis's emotional confession. The public reaction was swift and overwhelmingly negative. People were not looking for extensive medical details or invasive information about a child's private health matters. What they wanted was basic human acknowledgement that something serious was happening, some indication that the family and institution recognized the genuine concern being expressed by millions of people around the world. Instead, they received corporate language that could have been drafted for any minor public relations inconvenience. The tone felt dismissive, as though the palace believed it could simply wait out the storm of public interest without engaging substantively with the concerns being raised. Social media platforms erupted with criticism almost immediately after the statement was posted. Hashtags demanding transparency and expressing support for Charlotte began trending globally within minutes. The contrast between the cold, formal language of the official statement and the warm, heartfelt public response to Charlotte's situation could not have been more stark. Journalists who had maintained respectful distance from the story, honouring traditional boundaries around coverage of royal children, began writing opinion pieces questioning whether the institution's approach to the crisis was appropriate or sustainable in the modern era. What made the situation particularly difficult for the palace was that William and Catherine were noticeably absent from any public-facing aspects of the response. The statement had been issued by the communications office without any personal touch from the parents themselves. This absence fueled speculation about whether the couple had even approved the statement or whether it had been released over their objections by institutional handlers more concerned with protocol than genuine communication. Sources close to the couple later suggested that they had indeed been frustrated by the statement, feeling it did not reflect their voices or their wishes for how to address the public's legitimate concerns. The palace's attempt to present Louis at a carefully staged public appearance shortly after the statement's release only deepened the sense that something was fundamentally wrong with how the situation was being managed. During a walkabout near Windsor, Louis appeared alongside his mother, but he was noticeably subdued. He said nothing to gathered crowds or media, kept his eyes downward, and held tightly to Catherine's hand. While this might have been intended to show that he was fine and that family life was continuing normally, the effect was precisely the opposite. The boy who had bravely spoken truth about his sister now appeared silenced, and the visual contrast was not lost on observers. Commentators and child psychology experts began raising concerns about whether Louis was being pressured to conform to institutional expectations in ways that might be harmful to his emotional development. The question being asked across media platforms was whether the palace had essentially coerced a child who had told an uncomfortable truth into public silence. This narrative, once it took hold, proved extremely damaging to the institution's image. The monarchy was being portrayed not as a caring family supporting each other through crisis, but as a cold machine that prioritized image control even at the expense of children's emotional well-being. Then came the leak that changed everything. An anonymous source, later suspected to be someone within the medical community who had treated Charlotte, provided information to several international news agencies about the nature of her condition. Initially, there was hesitation about publishing medical information obtained through such channels, particularly concerning a child. But once the details were verified by independent medical consultants who confirmed the information was consistent with documented symptoms and treatments, the news began to spread. Princess Charlotte had been diagnosed with a rare autoimmune neurological disorder. The condition affects multiple systems, including muscle coordination, speech patterns, and cognitive processing. For months, she had been undergoing intensive treatment involving physical therapy to help maintain muscle function, speech therapy to address communication challenges, and various behavioral interventions designed to help her cope with the cognitive impacts. All of this had been happening entirely away from public view, in private medical facilities and within the walls of royal residences where staff were bound by strict confidentiality. The revelation was devastating in multiple ways. It explained the months of absences, the visible changes in Charlotte's appearance and energy levels, the profound stress evident in William and Catherine's demeanour. It also highlighted just how much effort had gone into concealing the reality of what the family was dealing with. The public's reaction was not anger at having been kept in the dark about medical details, but rather a profound sadness that Charlotte had been fighting such a difficult battle while also bearing the burden of maintaining a public image of perfection. Medical experts interviewed by various news outlets explained that the type of condition Charlotte was dealing with could be unpredictable in its progression and impact. Some patients respond well to treatment and regain significant function, while others face ongoing challenges that require long-term management and adaptation. The uncertainty surrounding prognosis likely contributed to the family's reluctance to discuss the situation publicly, not wanting to define Charlotte by a medical condition whose trajectory was still unclear. But it was what emerged next that truly captured the world's emotional attention. A video surfaced that had been recorded weeks earlier at Charlotte's school. It had never been intended for public distribution, filmed as a private moment during what appeared to be a small gathering or presentation within her class. In the video, Charlotte speaks slowly and deliberately, her voice soft but clear. She thanks her classmates and teachers for their patience with her, for helping her when her hands do not work the way they used to, for treating her like a normal person rather than someone who is sick or different. The grace and maturity she displayed in that moment was almost unbearable to witness. Here was a child dealing with a serious medical condition, facing challenges that would test adults, yet expressing gratitude and concern for how others might be affected by her situation. Behind the camera, Catherine's voice could be heard, quiet and trembling, encouraging her daughter to take her time. The emotion in the Princess of Wales's voice, the way it cracked slightly as she offered support, revealed the depth of what the family had been privately enduring. The final moments of the video provided an image that would come to symbolize the entire crisis. As Charlotte finished speaking, the camera shifted slightly, revealing Prince Louis standing beside her. His hand was clasped tightly in hers, his expression serious and protective. In that single frame, the bond between the siblings was unmistakable. Louis was not just a brother who had spoken out of turn, he was a child who had been watching his sister suffer and had reached a point where he could no longer maintain the pretense that everything was fine. The image of the two children, Charlotte vulnerable but brave, Louis protective and steadfast, spread across social media, platforms with extraordinary speed. Within hours, it had been shared millions of times, accompanied by messages of support, personal stories from families dealing with similar challenges, and calls for the royal family to embrace a new approach to public life. A hashtag supporting Charlotte surged past 100 million uses, becoming one of the most widely shared expressions of collective concern and compassion in recent social media history. What struck many observers most powerfully was the contrast between Charlotte's handling of her own situation and the institution's handling of the public response. While palace officials had scrambled to control narratives, issue carefully worded non-statements, and manage the crisis through traditional channels of spin and deflection, a young girl had simply told her truth with clarity, honesty, and remarkable emotional intelligence. She had not hidden behind corporate language or institutional protocols. She had acknowledged her reality, expressed gratitude for support, and demonstrated more genuine communication in a few sentences than the palace had managed in weeks of official statements. The leak of the video, while controversial in terms of how private material had become public, ultimately forced a reckoning that many argued was long overdue. The royal family could no longer maintain the fiction that everything was fine, that Charlotte's condition was a minor private matter requiring no public acknowledgement. The truth was now out, not in the cold language of medical diagnoses or official statements, but in the warm, human reality of a child's own words and the visible love of a family trying to support her through an incredibly difficult challenge.